Dr. Marandi, probably people already know, is professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. And he's coming on to talk to us about Iran, Israel, resistance, and more. So welcome, Dr. Marandi.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Katie.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining and taking the time. And I know it's late there. So I just want to start by asking you what it is you think that people should know about the reality right now in Iran, given how much obfuscation there is. What is the atmosphere right now on the ground? Obfuscation, I should say, by Western media.
Yes, well, I think first we have to go over very briefly the last 4.5 decades and how Iran has been demonized, not just in the Western media, but in Arabic media controlled by oil and gas-rich dictatorships. So there's been a lot of hostility towards Iran that has been created as a result of these media narratives. And something that I've experienced myself when I traveled abroad. People have some very extraordinary and very strange views of Iran, but that's the power of media. That's the power of narratives. And it's not just the media, it's also academia, it's academic journals. You have a host of Iran experts that have never been to Iran, or you have these Iranians who work at institutions in the United States that hire a particular person who produces a particular narrative. And so the views on Iran are so hostile and negative that if anyone wants to say anything different, they're going to seem bad, or they're going to be seen as propagandists. And it's almost impossible to dent that narrative. But I would argue that since 9/11 and the forever wars, this has gradually changed very, very slowly. But I would say that over the past 21 months, there has been a drastic shift in the way in which many people are beginning to see Iran, because they see how the narrative on Gaza and Palestine and the Israeli regime is in the mainstream media is so horrific. The questions are now raised about Iran, especially since Iran is, alongside Yemen, the only country that really supports the Palestinian cause. Right now, the situation in Iran is calm. People are very angry. They see this as an unprovoked war and illegal and illegitimate. And from the very beginning, innocent civilians were targeted. Western media likes to present this as some sort of sudden attack, a very sophisticated operation. But basically, what the Israeli regime did in most cases was that they struck civilian targets. For example, in one apartment block where there were one or two senior officers, they broke down the whole block, killing 65 people, including 20-some kids. It's actually not very far from here. And it's close to a studio that I sometimes go to for interviews with internationals. So, and there's nothing very complicated about figuring out where a general lives. His neighbors know that. People around in the neighborhood know that. Sometimes they're on TV, so they're public figures often. But again, I think that the Western media, what it's been trying to do over the last week, especially during the first day, is to glorify this assault in order to sort of whitewash the last 20-some months, the 20 months and 20 and a half months. So, they've been justifying this genocide, this Holocaust for so long. And recently we saw that the mood was changing. And I think that was a result of public pressure and the fact that they recognized that the public turned against Israel. So Iranians are therefore very angry. They're more united than I've ever seen over the past few decades. But this is going to be a tough war. It's going to last a long period of time. Tehran is not crowded. After the attacks began, the administration, the government, they allowed many people to work at home, just like during Corona. And many people were given holidays. So a lot of people in Tehran have left the city. They're working from outside the city, or they're on vacation. So the streets in Tehran aren't very crowded. And things are quiet. And yeah, there are explosions every now and then. They kill people. But it's a huge city. So sometimes there may be something happening on the west side of Tehran, and people on the east side don't hear it, and vice versa.
So, something that you mentioned is that the people are very united. This happens a lot, I think, when there's attempts at regime change from the outside. You have not only kind of the people who are already rallying around the government, but you even have people who would otherwise perhaps be protesting the government. Can you talk about this phenomenon?
Yeah, sure. First of all, according to all polls in the past, the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of Iranians. That does not mean that Iranians have been satisfied with the government or the administration. No, in fact, it's the opposite. Iranians have always been deeply unhappy with, especially the economy, with, um, inflation, jobs. These are always at the top of people's concerns, and their views are usually not favorable about the economy. And of course, we've had sanctions, very heavy sanctions, for a very long period of time. So Iranian administrations are not working under ordinary circumstances. But in any case, ordinary people are not satisfied. But that does not mean that the unhappy ordinary person say that the state is illegitimate. A strong segment, a strong majority of Iranians view the state as very legitimate. But what we have seen is that during the last week, there has been a new poll that came out. People of all walks of life and all political backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, they have become much more united than before. And of course, this has a lot to do with the fact that the United States and the Israeli regime, they've carried out an unprovoked war. And they suddenly launched attacks across the country and murdered people and destroyed infrastructure. And they're demanding that Iran give up its sovereignty. And that's not going to happen. Iran is not only not going to give up its sovereignty, it's going to fight to punish the aggressor. So the expectation of ordinary Iranians now is for the armed forces to fight back. And this is something that's come out in the polls. But I think anecdotal evidence, that at least that I've seen in the people around it, indicate that this is definitely the case.
Yeah. I mean, I know this phenomenon more in like Cuba, for instance, right? There are ebbs and flows, obviously, but a lot of people have pointed out that the embargo, it harmed people a lot, of course, but it also forced people to rally together. And Cuba was always able to point to this outside bad guy.
I've spent a very brief period of time in Cuba once, and it's quite stunning how the United States strangles this country and makes people suffer, whereas it's obviously no threat to the United States, and it's barely just trying to survive. Yet the United States continues to strangle Cuba as we speak. But on the other hand, it has now removed all sanctions from Al Qaeda and ISIS Syria. Syria controlled by ISIS and Al Qaeda. So Syria controlled by ISIS and Al Qaeda is not a security threat to the United States, but Cuba, which is barely able to survive because of the barbaric sanctions, they are a threat to the United States.
Right.
So when you just look at this example and you just think that, well, Iran is being treated with the same sort of standards.
Right. It's a good endorsement of Iran, right?
Oh, yes. I actually think that Iran has done I mean, when I'm sitting among friends, let me be very clear about this. When me and my friends sit together, no one speaks well of the government. No one says, yeah, we've done a great job, or look at the metro, or look how clean it is. No, that's not how Iranians talk. We say, look how garbage this is, look what a terrible job they're doing there. The metros are not working, the airlines are always late. That is part of our culture, by the way. And I think during my stay in the UK, I felt that the British were someone like the Iranians, and that they were usually looking at the darker side of things, the negative, the empty half of the glass. But since I'm speaking to an audience that does not live in Iran, I feel I have a responsibility just, to explain the half full part of the glass.
Right.
And that is that Iran, under sanctions, has been able to develop an indigenous industry, something which the Russians have learned a lot from over the last 3 or so years since the war began. The Iranians have made a lot of advances in high-tech industries, on nanotechnology, in stem cell research. Anyone could look it up. Iran is very high up there among the more advanced countries, and in AI and other fields. And you can also see this in the wars, sadly, in a way, because Iran is being forced to use its weapon. But Iran's missiles are through multiple layers of air defenses that are being led by the Americans, and a host of countries are cooperating together to help the Israelis, but still Iranian missiles are getting through, and so are drones. And that, I think, regardless of the fact that, war is war, but it reflects the competence, the ability of the Iranians to be able to be creative and to produce things that the world's so-called superpower, or the declining superpower, cannot do anything about.